have some other questions to ask.
Dr. Acton or Dr. Durst, you want to make just a general comment about?
Well, I'm real curious as to how your attitudes changed about military aviation, Walt, as you went through the process and then became involved with flight tests and then segued into an astronaut. How do you see that changing for you, and then how would you see it changing in the future?
Military aviation, for flying, there was no difference. I mean, when you get your pilot's ratings, you're expected to perform. Well, you might get killed or you might wipe out somehow, but in essence, you're expected to be able to handle that. My suggestion to anybody is you keep challenging yourself a little bit so you become proficient at it. But when I went to NASA, I was just transferring from A4Ds at the time where I was flying the reserves, but I transferred also to the Navy Reserve Squadron up at Dallas. And so I got to check out in FJ4 Bakers, and we got the FAQs, Crusaders. But almost all of my flying was at NASA. I probably, over the whole 8 years that I was at NASA, I figured out one time that I averaged about 32 to 34 hours a month for the whole time I was there on the T-38s. Times have changed. We had a lot of T-38s. For a while, we had 30 pilots and 30 T-38s. And we basically, all of our flying, all of our business we conducted in that. I think the whole 8 years I was there, I may have flown commercial 3-4 times, something like that. And one time I remember it was because I had to ground my T-38. The only time in 8 years I had to ground T-38 en route.
Great maintenance. We had just super.
Yes, terrific airplane, yeah, also. And still out there, a lot of people are still flying T-38s around the world. But that's changed. The whole world has changed. You're growing up in a different world when it comes to flying. I was out about a year ago at NASA for something out at the Ellington Field, and I decided to stop by NASA. And I went down to the hangar, went in, the guy said hello to me, he was going to see me, show me around. He was going to be leaving NASA for a couple months himself. So we went out and looked at the T-38s. They're more modern airplanes. They've relieved the pilot of more things to do. For example, it even had a small weather radar in it, autopilot. I never had an autopilot in my entire life. But what really got to me was the pilots were all limited to 15 hours a month, maximum, if you were on a flight crew. Otherwise, it was 12 hours a month. And with the mission specialists who they checked out the backseat riders in it, if you had somebody like that with you, you could, well, you couldn't fly if you had worked 12 hours doing something else. They limited that. So it was basically placing a limitation on you. If you had a mission specialist who's a qualified backseat guy there, then they might let you take one flight on it. You had to fly, you had to do your flight planning to arrive at your alternate destination. How many people are here into knowing flying your main destination and alternate? Anything about instant flying, things like that. They had to plan, not necessarily arrive, they had to plan on having 1,000 pounds of fuel left when they got to the alternate.
When they got there.
When they got to the alternate, now for planning purposes. Now you took off
You can't go
T-38, you're fortunate if you got airborne with 3,000 pounds of fuel in it. I'm just going to give you an idea of the difference, because you're living with a difference. You're living in a new world of flying. It's one that I can't even say I understand all that well. Back in those days, and if you want to read my book, The All-American Boys, I tell about one of these trips. We used to take off, and this is what I'm talking about, the personal challenge. We'd take off from Los Angeles, and it was, I think, 1,285 nautical miles from there to Houston. And if it was the right time of the year, you started to get a tailwind up there, and you could plan on getting maybe getting up to average 60 knots for the entire way. We calculated you could make it nonstop. So,
At about 40,000.
well, we start off 41, then 43, then 45,
Okay.
you know? And then we shut down an engine,
Yeah.
we shut down an engine, go back to idle for the last 100 and some miles. But what I'm getting at is, we like the personal challenge. Nobody ever got killed doing it, but there's not an Air Force instructor I ever saw that ever believed we could fly nonstop from Los Angeles to Houston. But I guarantee you that we got something out of it when we did it. It was a satisfaction. I'll never forget the one I write about in the book. You'll appreciate this one. Is I was in the back seat, Wally was in the front.
Wally Schrock, again.
Yeah, Wally Shaw, he was our commander on our flight. We did a lot of flying together. And you usually trade seats. One guy flies one leg, and the other guy flies the next leg. But Wally was scheduled to come back to fly that leg. I'm in the back seat, and I'm sitting here with my E6B computer. Slide rule, circular slide rule. You know what they are. Right. So, I know he does.
You've got one sitting right next to you up there.
Okay, so I'm sitting here with my, how about that? So I'm sitting here with my E6B.
That won't fit in my pocket.
And you take off from there, and instead of making a vertical climb, as soon as you get airborne, out of burner. And doing everything you can to conserve fuel, climbing on up, trying to get to 41,000 feet, and heading out to the east, and you're trying to get to the point where you're averaging. We figured out you had to average at least 60 knots the entire way.
Tailwind.
Take a tailwind, yes, the jet stream. You catch the jet stream just right, certain times of the year. And I can remember we crossed the, what's the river, the Colorado River. We crossed the Colorado River, and I told Wally, I said, well, we're getting about 30 knots of tailwind, and you filed for El Paso. El Paso was only 600 nautical miles, so you filed for El Paso. Before you get to El Paso, we started picking up things a little bit. It still wasn't good enough, so I refiled for Austin,
Kelly.
No, Kelly. No, not
No,
Kelly. Whatever. It's-
no, Austin.
Yeah, it's now their commercial field. Refiled for there, and started looking like, well, we might gonna be making this, so we did eventually refile for Ellington. Ellington's there where we flew out of. And the weather was clear, so we didn't have to worry about any weather, and we let it down, and we pulled back to idle right there about Bergstrom Air Force Base, pulled it back to idle. And Wally and I are talking it over, and we're down to about 30,000 feet, and Wally says, why don't we shut an engine down? I said, yeah, I think we better shut an engine down. So we shut one engine down. That probably saved 30 pounds of fuel. And we're coming in, and we're really, really cautious because we knew how close it was. So we're almost over Ellington, and the tower operators got so they kind of knew when we were doing this. And they were mostly helpful to us. And we always tried to get a straight-in approach, save fuel, of course. So as we're coming in, and I look, and it looks a little high to me, and Wally's being so safe, that we end up actually crossed over the end of the runway, 5,000 feet, one engine, the other one in idle, 5,000 feet, and Wally has to make a 360 from there down. And so I'm sitting in the back seat there, well, just in case. It's the only time in my life I found myself sitting there and holding on to both ejection handle. And Wally was a fine aviator. It's coming in really steep when we touched down normally. Nobody ever knows what the kind of problem was, but we had great satisfaction out of doing it. Now,
The refuelers knew.
that's right, they did. And sometimes they had to put a couple pounds in more than they thought. Now, he's not gonna like me telling you this kind of story. Okay?
That's a fact. If you're an astronaut, go ahead, otherwise,
And all I'm doing is telling you that in the military, especially in those days, your job was to feel as proficient as you can. Whether you were right or wrong about it, you wanted to think you were the best damn aviator there was around there. So that's not something that's open to you, and you're never going to get to have this kind of opportunity. It was like a flying club to us back in those days, 30 airplanes, 30 pilots, hell, you couldn't ever ask for anything any better. But what I'm trying to say is, push yourself, not to those kind of limits necessarily, but push yourself to some limits, test yourself when you're doing it. You know, don't look for, when you get your instrument ready, don't try to find nothing but the best weather out there to do your flight. Go get
Fine weather.
experience at some weather when it's not bad, and you develop the confidence. When you have the self-confidence, you can go out and do almost anything you want to in this area.
You always need instrument times, go find some.
Right.
And there's a similar situation of trying to get from Ellington to Andrews.